This presentation explores the Morrill Act and the unfair land treaties drawn up by the United States and their consequences on various Native American communities. The Morrill Acts of 1862 and 1890 had a major impact on the development of higher education in the United States by creating state schools on parcels of land acquired through mostly unfair treaty agreements with Native American tribes. The purpose of the Morrill Act was for the United States to begin establishing colleges that focused on agriculture and the mechanical arts so that average citizens would have the opportunity to attend college, and it would no longer be a right reserved for the wealthy, and so that the country would benefit from the knowledge being attained by those attending. The United States had millions of acres of untamed land that had been negotiated through various treaties with Native Americans, and parcels of this land was granted to states so they could establish colleges and expand the expertise of the country's growing citizenship. And while the Morrill Act aimed to promote higher education, its 1890 counterpart integrated the creation of historically black colleges and universities around the country with no consideration for uplifting the educational opportunities for the country's indigenous population. This page shows a timeline of land grants and the implementation of the land grant college system. In 1862, the Morrill Act specifically stated that the federal government would provide federal land to states so that the state could establish colleges that focused on agriculture and the mechanical arts. From 1863 to 1890, states used the land grants to establish 69 land grant colleges and universities, such as Texas A&M and Ohio State. In 1890, the second Morrill Act provided additional funding and land grants for colleges, including those serving African American students. North Carolina A&T and Langston University are a few examples of these historically black colleges and universities. The Equity and Educational Land Grant status of 1994 finally recognized 29 tribal colleges as land grant institutions. Interestingly enough, the list has 29 colleges and a tech school or two, but no bona fide universities. Times are changing, but our Native American brothers and sisters are still lagging in terms of equity when compared to large and long-established institutions. This page has 3 maps. The first one shows where the Native American reservations were located across the country in the 19th century. The second map pinpoints land-grant college campuses across the country established because of the Morrill Act of 1862 and those of the Act in 1890. The third map indicates indigenous lands claimed by the United States through treaty, land cessation, or seizure, and which parcels of that land were given to land-grant universities under the Morrill Act. This is a good one to enlarge to see in greater detail where those lands were and which universities were recipients of those grants. The establishment of the land-grant college system had a significant and detrimental impact on the indigenous American people. While the act itself did not lead to their dispossession, the federal government's previous seizures of tracts of their tribal land was utilized to create these new public universities. The forced relocation and displacement of tribes from previously negotiated treaties had consequences that contributed to disparities in educational access and opportunities for Native American communities that continue to this present day. The tribal lands were dispossessed and stolen from the indigenous tribes people with outright seizures and land takeovers without their full understanding or consent, using unfair and unratified treaties. As a result, their traditional practices were disrupted, hunting grounds and access to natural resources were blatantly usurped without their consideration. The Native Americans were not consulted, considered, or fairly compensated for the loss of their land. Promises of aid and assistance were broken, and they were forced to learn the civilized lifestyle of the white man and forfeit everything they'd ever known. The dispossession of their lands allowed the Morrill Act to be implemented and has had long-lasting social, cultural, and economic impacts on indigenous communities. With high unemployment rates, substance abuse, poor health, and subpar education, the Native American population on reservation lands are still disenfranchised in these United States of America. This slide showcases a few of the most unfair treaties that various Native American tribes entered into with the United States. The Treaty of Greenville was after the Northwest Indian War. It was meant to bring peace between various tribes and the United States. However, they were pitifully compensated for present-day Ohio, great parts of Michigan, Indiana, and Wisconsin. The Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek forced the Choctaw Nation to cede Mississippi and Alabama, and they were relocated to modern-day Oklahoma. This treaty was part of the Indian removal policy of 1830 and led to the infamous Trail of Tears, a sad story of harsh travel conditions, disease, exposure to the elements, inadequate supplies, and poor planning by the U.S. government. The Treaty of Fort Laramie attempted to establish peace with various Plain Indian tribes, but the terms were not enforced and the land was constantly being encroached upon by settlers. The Treaty of Fort Wise stripped the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of 44 million of their ancestral lands in Colorado and led to the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, where the U.S. Army attacked a small Arapaho village. These are just a few of the unfair treaties that caused Native Americans to lose their ancestral land, treaties that negatively affected their environment in perpetuity but has benefited the United States indefinitely. This slide highlights a few treaties and the tribes that were impacted by them and indicates which colleges ultimately benefited and received land grants from those treaties as a result of the Morrill Acts 1 and 2. The Morrill Land Grant Act led to the establishment of numerous colleges and universities on lands that were originally Native American territories or reservations. These are a few that now offer free tuition to federally recognized indigenous people: the University of Arizona, South Dakota State University, and Oregon State University, just to name a few. By providing tuition waivers and other financial support, colleges and universities are working to create more equitable access to higher education for Native American students and help address the historical marginalization and systemic barriers that have been in place for generations. Several land-grant universities have begun to acknowledge their historical connection to the dispossession of indigenous lands and have created initiatives aimed at supporting the academic success of Native American students on their campuses.